Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Game Developer Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Brian Francis. Today, we're talking about the GDC Festival of Gaming's latest State of the Industry report. This report surveys game industry professionals for key insights on demographics, what tools people are using to make games, what platforms they're making them for, layoffs, interest in unions, and beyond. Before we begin, we need to do a big disclaimer. Game Developer is a sibling organization of GDC Festival of Gaming under our parent company, Informa Festivals. For the last few years, we've participated in the construction of the survey, helping determine topics and providing some copy editing here and there. You'll also hear us discuss the Game Developer Collective today, which is a joint project between Game Developer and Omdia, which is another sibling organization owned by Informa. We've got a lot of friends here. They're all great people. This year, the State of the Industry report, like GDC itself, underwent a big transformation. I've been with this organization for more than a decade, and it's the most significant overhaul I've seen. But because of that, the data inside is more robust than ever and offers us deeper insights on the professional world of making video games. We're making today's episode a two-part conversation. First, I'm speaking with GDC Festival of Gaming marketing manager Beth Elderkin to discuss the reasons for updating the survey. Then, game developer news editor Chris Kerr and news columnist Nicole Carpenter will join me to discuss some of the most notable data points from the report. And Beth, good to have you back on the Game Developer Podcast. How you doing?
I'm glad to be back. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm here to talk about surveys and numbers. But as I just mentioned for our listeners and viewers at home, we're going to pause for a moment on talking about the hard facts of the survey per se. We're going to talk about the survey itself because unconsciously, even I'm not fully remembering it sometimes. The GDC State of the Industry survey, for many people, it lives up to its name. It is a snapshot of the game industry. And sitting down to parse what that means for the game community at large, for GDC attendees, for people joining us for the first ever GDC Festival of Gaming, stopping to just, remember, there's a lot going on here and also, understand some of the underpinnings is going to be valuable for people, I think. So thank you for joining me to dive into all that.
Of course. I'll talk about numbers all day.
Yeah. The first numbers, I guess, are years. You joined the GDC team a few years back, and the State of the Industry project became your baby in a lot of senses. What were, for just you personally, a bit of human interest, what made you want to jump on this project and dig into it so much? Because I've really enjoyed watching you just be more involved with it than I've ever seen anyone be involved with it.
Well, thank you. First, I appreciate that. Well, really, when I started, it was really because there was no one else to do it. Because the previous person who was in charge, they left to go do something else, and there needed to be someone at the helm. And so really, without a lot of experience, I decided to do that myself. And the more I got into it, the more I understood the data, the more I got to see those year-on-year comparisons, the better an insight it gave into the game worker experience. And it gave me a connection that I didn't really have before. And the more I've been able to dive in and understand the game industry in so many different ways and look at trends and look at ongoing issues, I know it's going to be a weird word to use, but it's kind of beautiful.
No, that's, look, I would not have called it beautiful, but also there are things I call beautiful that no one else calls beautiful, like, say, certain minis that are back here behind my desk. No, they look terrible until they look beautiful. Connecting to the game worker experience is great because when people don't work in games, when they try to understand anything about the game making process, I'm still always surprised at how I have to things that make sense to me, even as a journalist and as someone with light touch on the other side. I'm like, oh, this seems obvious, doesn't it? It's like, oh no, it's super complicated actually. So the fact that a survey doesn't just help you connect to the game industry, but to like other people out there, one of their outlets that are not necessarily only about games pick it up. I hadn't quite put two and two together on my head that before, that this is one of the only windows in.
Yeah, one thing I really love about continuing to do State of the Game industry for how many years we've been doing it is because it is first and foremost a public service. We don't get it sponsored on purpose. We don't monetize it. We make sure that it's free for anyone to download, whether or not you are a GDC attendee. Even whether or not you're part of the game industry, you just want to have a snapshot into what that world is like. It's really a place to provide information to the larger game dev community. That said, we have had some changes and growth, and with that growing pains over the years. And I'm really happy where we are now and where we are going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can remember years where, and gosh, like I don't remember what years, I don't remember who was running it, but people take the weight of it very seriously, and I've seen instances, before where, like maybe a mistake slips through or something, or God, one year I think just like out of sheer like, oh no, typo, a whole country or a whole region, or no, it was a whole platform. That's what it was. Like PC got omitted from something, and it completely warped the data, and it was really, it was really sad and frustrating for people, I'm sure. But like, the fact that people had that strong a reaction to it not being there just showed, it showed why I guess more than anything about, like we talked before about like understanding the industry. It showed that this is information people want, right? Like whether it's GDC providing it, whether it's some other service providing it, like there's a need in the industry to see these things, because especially when you're making games, you are so down in the hole. Like you are, maybe if you are connected on social media, you can sort of look around and see some landscape, but no one's doing the hard numbers data, like survey takers everywhere are, if that makes sense.
It does. I think it's also just as much a reflection of the game community as it is, and as personalities. The game industry is one of the most creative industries out there. It is a perfect blend of art and beauty and ingenuity with technical prowess. And you have so many people who get into this industry because they love it so much. And they love it so much, they want to know as much about it as possible and as much about themselves and their community as they can. That's why we ask questions about unionization, why we ask questions about crunch, why we ask questions about DEI, because it's important not only for us to know, but it's important for our audience to know, because these are things that they care about.
Yeah, right. Like it's sort of it's sometimes cynical to say, any survey, right? I don't know. We cover surveys a lot on Game Developer, right? Like it's sometimes easy to say, oh, well, they only asked about that because it's like controversial or a hot topic, but it's like, no, like one of the data points on this survey has to do with the impact of tariffs imposed by the United States government on other countries in the survey. And that's just not just there because those tariffs are in the news. That's there because, as the data prove out, as Chris, Nicole, and I will discuss later in this episode, it's impacted people. And when the survey questions are being drafted, I, as mentioned in the disclaimer up top, had participated in some of those discussions, and I remember it being, people are talking about this being affected and important, and like this, we all have at least some anecdotal evidence that this is a real thing, and not just following the headlines, if you will.
I mean, we had a similar experience with the questions about travel to the United States and work in the United States because of ongoing immigration and gender identity policies. There was a discussion about whether is this pertinent to the game community? And my argument was, it absolutely is. We need to know if game developers are coming to the United States for work and for travel. We need to know if outside companies are wanting to do business with companies in the U.S. This is important information for game developers and game industry professionals to have. And it's not just because it's a quote unquote hot topic. Sometimes even when it's a hot topic, it gets a little bit harder to cover because you're nervous about, rubbing someone the wrong way or, saying something that's going to, cause a reaction that you're not intending. Because for me, it's getting the data out there, letting people make their own decisions, their own conclusions. I am not there to editorialize. I'm not there to share my opinion. I am there to share what other people think and feel.
Yeah. I mean, even remember, if we're talking about travel, like this is obviously not travel into the U.S., but travel out of the U.S. Like last year, I covered the story of one of the individuals suing the U.S. government, the Trump administration, for its policies on passports and what gender identity you're allowed to express on your passport. One of the people suing the government was a transgender person from the state of Massachusetts, where I live, where they said I cannot, they were a game developer, and they said I cannot go do game development with my peers at my international company because of the passport changes. And it's just one of those, like, you know, we keep games just exist in the world, man, and the world catches up with you.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things we've noticed in the survey over the past couple of years is LGBTQ plus representation continues to grow. You know, whether it's an actual growth in representation or growth in identity or identity acknowledgement, you know, there's many different factors. But in this past survey, 39% of people ages 18 to 34 identify as LGBTQ, which is, I believe, at least double the national average, which to me is amazing, and it speaks to how diverse this community is and how diverse the perspectives are that go into creating these games.
Yeah, and some folks I know from the community, there's all kinds of like small jokes I've heard about like oh, of course, like I'm into this, like, you know, when, like, you know, growing up in the 90s, like I was weird and bullied, so I went into video games. What do you mean I'm not supposed to be not into video games now or whatever? I don't know. Let's turn to the survey this year went through some of the most extensive changes that I've seen during my time at Informa, the company that owns both GDC Festival of Gaming and Game Developer. I've seen changes of all different sorts, but this year, like, you went really big on making some ones that both like supported the foundations, but also changed. I'm spending a lot of words to say you changed a lot. Why? I went off track there. I'm sorry.
By all means. Well, last year we changed the design, and this year we changed the foundation. So over the past several of years, you know, we've had various responses to the State of Game Industry Report, positive, negative, in between. You know, everybody has their opinion, has their right to their opinion. But sometimes, you know, we would get criticisms that, you know, rang true in a deeper way. And, you know, I would, you know, look at those and evaluate those and say, what are these criticism? What is this feedback? And some of the biggest feedback was about the, you know, the overrepresentation of folks in the United States and in Western Europe, but not just that, the lack of transparency about it. And also having people answer questions that did not match their expertise. And these had been systemic issues that had been part of state of the game industry for a long time. And what I decided to do was do something about it. One of the things I did was there was someone named Lane Nooney, who is an NYU professor, and they've gone on social media in the previous years, and they've, you know, spoken their truth about their thoughts on the state of the game industry. And while, you know, in a personal way, I could just be like, oh my goodness, someone's saying something and I don't like it. I have to look at it in a practical way of, they have a point. And so what I did is I reached out to them and I said, can we have a discussion? I really want to hear what your views and thoughts are. And we had a great conversation, and I ended up hiring them as a consultant alongside we did some outreach with the international community. We paired up with an international marketing firm to increase that outreach. And we really just dove into the survey and said, what is working about this? What isn't? What can we do to improve it? And I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty details of what we did, but suffice to say, we worked really hard to make sure that if you were a marketer, you were getting marketing questions. If you were a business professional, you were getting business questions. If you were a game designer, you were getting game designer questions. And on top of that, we were also being more transparent with the strengths and the weaknesses of our data, because, you know, there's only so much we can do. We did improve our international representation. We went from 58% based in the US to 54% this year, which is 4 percentage points, which isn't nothing. That said, there's a lot more we can do, and we're trying to be more transparent in our growth process.
Yeah, and in the report itself, like as I was glancing through things, I was like, oh, like there's a little note here with a little bit of like the, hey, caveat, like we're talking, because folks are from these regions, like even if we're just talking about platforms, right? Like what platforms are you developing for? Like there's always momentum on that ground, but like if you don't have a heavy international participation rate, then you might not capture, like developments in mobile free to play. But then also like if you just sort of overcorrect to chase that, like, oh no, we're not getting that mobile enough, then you get people from those regions who are like, what the heck, like we're not just doing mobile, right? Like or like new regions, there's all this nuance that if you just sort of race to if you look at sort of the output of the data at the end point of the day, if you look at the results and say like these results aren't where they should be, as opposed to the structural reasons that things are the way they are, you're just gonna chase your tail around, I guess, is my understanding of it, observing from my neck of the woods, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time coming, and it's not to say that previous state of the game industries were not representative. They just could be more representative, and it's something about always growing and always trying to improve, and that is always my goal. Is I am never satisfied. If something can be better, it should be better, and I'm going to work to make it better. And even this year, I'm already looking at it and noticing things that will be improved for state of the industry 2027 and 2028 and beyond. It's a constant process, and it's one I feel very fortunate to get to participate in such a meaningful way.
Yeah. As I've participated in consulting on the survey, I have learned things about statistics, about like the number, like sample sizes. Are there any fun things about conducting surveys that you learned that as you went through this that you didn't like have any idea about before? You're like, oh my God, I understand this so much more now.
Oh, I mean, where do we start? It's kind of all of the above. Because before I started in content marketing with GDC Festival of Gaming, I was in journalism and I did investigative journalism. So I would come in at the end of the data and I would look at it from that perspective. I was not there from the foundation. When you're there from the beginning, I think the thing that really amazes me and surprised me the most was seeing how the data changes, not just from year to year, but also from group to group. We actually have someone at our sister company, Omdia. Her name is Cheryl. And every year she puts together our pivot tables so we can look at every single piece of information and look at it. Okay, if you were a game designer and you are in this age group and you work part-time, what are your thoughts on unionization? We can go that granular, and we do, because that gives us really great information to work from, and it gives us really nice insights.
Yeah. One, Cheryl's great. For those of regular readers who've read my stories where I mentioned the Game Developer Collective, which is a survey project that Omdia does with us. Man, we're just going through all the sibling organizations today. Cheryl's great. Cheryl helps bring those together and gives us like other amazing insights on like snapshots of more segmented snapshots of the industry throughout the year. I did not mean that to be a plug, for the record. I just really wanted to praise Cheryl because I've been really impressed with her
work. Credit where credit is due.
Yeah. The segmenting thing though that you're talking about, right? Like that's how we've been able to break down some of the key insights. Like everyone's favorite topic, generative AI, which I swear is a black hole, always drawing me in on this podcast. But if we'll touch on it, like some of the data you bore out this year was able to tell us, about like what age ranges prefer using generative AI, what ends of the industry, obviously the sentiment data is something I'll be talking about, me, Chris, and Nicole might talk about. But just knowing that, like, some of these, like who it is, like you sort of begin to get that. It's like you said up top, right? Like, okay, now I a little bit know more who is out there in my head when I picture like who has these feelings about generative AI, or even who's just using it, not even talking about the feelings. Like a little bit more of that pops in my head beyond just the anecdotal ones. So that's what segmentation really gets you. Yeah.
It does. And we've actually taken that a step further this year. We've actually taken a little bit of a look into the anonymized demographics for some of our open responses. So when we're looking at responses from people about things like generative AI, we're looking at things like, have they been laid off in the past 12 months? Are they a game designer, or are they in business? Are they a manager, a CEO, or are they a part-time contributor? So we're actually looking at that information to give us an insight into their perspectives, because somebody who has been laid off in the past 12 months is probably going to have a different opinion of generative AI than somebody who, hasn't. And as we saw in the results, those in business were definitely less impacted by layoffs than those in the more creative fields.
Yeah, which creates an immediate, the correlation is not causation, but if those less impacted by layoffs have more positive opinions about generative AI, then that, again, correlation, not causation, but certainly one of the curious things that pops out when you have data and you weren't trying to just twist it. Because even I, who love, I don't know, I am always cautious because I'm writing about data a lot, right? Like I'm the reporter. I'm doing what you used to do. It is always tricky to like try to find that balance of like, okay, that correlation exists. You guys help prove that correlation exists, but just letting that correlation be the only thing driving it and not looking for the nuance, not looking for those other data points. It's not, and I'm not saying this is the survey's fault for making it, just like that's the temptation on my side, on the reporting side, especially when you get a snappy headline out of it. It's so, the sweet allure of that, like, sweet, like, obvious data suggests obvious thing. It's always there. It's always taunting you, teasing you.
And I mean, even somebody in my position who is, coming into it to present information and not to present a perspective, it's still a challenge for me because I am a human being. I have my own opinions on many of these issues, especially because I have been a gamer for my entire life. I love this industry. I love playing games.
I believe you were in a union before, right?
I was in a union before, yes, full disclosure. I was in the WGA. And so I have my own personal viewpoints on these, but I have to take a step back because it's not my voice that's coming through. I didn't respond to the survey. This is not my opinion. These are the opinions of others. And so, it can become challenging because we all have biases. We all have internal viewpoints, but it's really about, what perspective you take and then how you use that moving forward.
Yeah, and something I've really enjoyed about, we're stuck on the generative AI topic because I'm still building up the escape velocity out of the black hole. Even though scientifically speaking, you can't get out of a black hole. I've always like sort of really leaned on the state of the industry surveys, assessment of it, because it's the most like, it's the one that captures the most like uncertainty, the most like, I don't know, the most like, I'm still trying to feel it out. Like obviously the numbers are more unfavorable this year, but compare that to, whenever someone's like, oh, well, like most people, this thing shows most people. I went to this and I heard most people were talking about this. I'm like, I don't think it's zero, but I don't think it's most. Like, right? Like I think when you have a contentious topic, one of two things is like either if you're looking at like something that's super binary and you get a 50-50, I'm like, yeah, that's probably like, something polarizing is probably like 50-50, 45-55, something like that. Like, yeah, that feels reliable. And then, but if it's polarizing, then it's all one-sided. I get a touch suspicious. So I've always been impressed by how like truly like even for things where I have differing opinions on, like SOTI does a really good job like letting all those perspectives in. Once again, I also sound like I'm just doing gassing up. That was a sincere opinion.
Well, thank you. I'll take the sincere opinions all day. Another example of that I'll mention for this year was about DEI initiatives. So, as you know, over the past 1 to 2 years, we've seen a change in, companies shying away from DEI, initiatives and policies, changing them from DEI to belonging and other things like that. And we asked our respondents if they've seen an impact at their companies. And what we found was overall, a majority did not. However, when we looked at specific groups, the answers changed dramatically. For people who are LGBTQ, 1/5 of them said they had noticed changes versus 10% who are not LGBTQ. Women and people of color were at almost 20%, whereas white participants were about 13%. So the numbers were very staggering between these different groups, which means even if something is not showing a huge number overall, the benefit of being able to look more granularly is you can look at those perspectives and give those people an opportunity to express themselves. Whereas if you just looked at the big number, they would get lost in it.
Yeah, that's what, and then the benefit is like whatever, if I ever write a story where, we're always doing our best. I don't always get it right, but if you ever write a story where, like, if you look at a headline I wrote and you go like, hey, wait a minute, does the data actually show that? Hey, it's out there. Go look for yourself, and then go yell at me on Twitter about it. Specifically, go yell at me on Twitter about it. Definitely not Blue Sky. I will definitely read it if you yell at me on Twitter. Wink. Anyway, silliness aside.
Well, I used to run the social media for GDC, but I do not anymore. So if you want to talk to GDC about your opinions, I'm not going to stop you, but I may not respond.
I'll say please do. I think like always in my time here, like I think the way everyone I've seen, I mean, a lot of people in games too, right? Like this is tied to the games community. The games community is like aggressively like, please give feedback. And it's always been great when people, like you talked about right earlier with like introducing Lane and like consulting Lane. That only happens when people, point things out or say things or offer something, so that's what's always been like it's a dialogue. Not all surveys, not all state of the industry surveys, not all snapshots like that, not all of those are dialogues. Like I really like the collective. I mentioned the collective project we do. I wouldn't necessarily say the collective project's a dialogue. It's something else. I don't know what that thing is because I'm just coming up with this on the fly, but it's the state of the industry survey, both in how it gathers responses and how people respond to it afterwards. Like it's definitely, it's a dialogue.
It is, because it really wouldn't exist without the game community sharing their views in it, and if people don't trust it, then they're not going to respond to it. And so for me, it's, if there's a way for me to increase that trust and to increase that accountability and transparency, I'm going to work to do that.
Yeah. Beth, what if you had the power to add a question on any topic you wanted to the survey as a gamer, as someone who loves games, what would you want to ask about that may or may not belong there?
I mean, this is a very tough one because for the most part, if I have one, it may end up in there in some form. I mean, it'll probably change in some capacity, but usually I'm not really thinking for myself. I'm thinking for the community and what I think the community would be interested to know. Oh man, that is a really tough question. Can I turn it around to you first while I think about it?
Good thing I thought about my answer while I was letting you do it. I would genuinely want like an open-ended question of, I would start with like what game inspires you, and obviously if you don't have a drop-down menu, then you've just created hell for like trying to accurately represent something, right? Because you could say Zelda, or you could say The Legend of Zelda, or you could say The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and then you've entered analytical hell. But at minimum, like I just like capturing what games are inspiring people is cool. And if I was getting mega ambitious, I would go, what art or technology inspires you that is not in games? Like I would 1-2 punch there, because there are so many great answers out there. There are so many little ways that like some of the great games from last year, whether it was Clair Obscur or Blueprints or Dispatch, said a little weird there. Dispatch, and the patch came out a little heavy. The anecdotes people have had about like, oh, this is what inspired me, were so unexpected, and like getting to bring that to people in a survey out of just a massive pool of respondents would be cool.
I mean, so many people learned what La Belle Époque is for the first time, thanks to Clair Obscur, which was great to me because I love French history. In a similar vein, so there is a question when I am doing interviews, whether it's for our Trends Report or for the GDC SideQuest podcast, which you definitely check out on the Game Developer Podcast Network. One question I love to ask is, what do you love about making games? which seems like such a simple question, but you get you always get a smile from somebody because the industry has so much love and passion in it. And giving somebody an opportunity to share that passion, you can't go wrong. And it's not only a great question for them, but it's also great for me because I love seeing the light in somebody's eyes when they talk about this art form that is so multifaceted and has just so much depth and so much potential to it. There's still so much more we can do with games, and we're doing more and more every year. I mean, just think about baby steps. That's not something that would have even been like possible, a decade ago. And now we have this whole open world game. I am not even trying that one because I could not play co-op to save my life. So
Yeah.
I'm not even going to try. I greatly respect baby steps for what it's doing. I would not be able to make it 10 feet.
Bennett Foddy just like completely having your number. One of the designers on Baby Steps and the designer of QWOP just completely like knowing I can make a game so unique and so strange that everyone's going to want to play it, but a bunch of people can't because they're just going to trip over themselves. Like that's it. That's games, baby. That's the medium.
And that's okay. Some games just aren't for me, but I still respect the heck out of them.
Yeah. Well, Beth, thank you so much for joining today. Where should folks go if they want to download the survey for themselves and for some reason haven't checked the show notes yet, where I will definitely put it?
Yes, so you can download the State of the Game Industry report for free. You can head to either the link below or you can go to our website. That's gdcomp.com. And there will be a direct link to download the report. And I'm also going to be checking into our GDC Discord, answering questions if anyone wants to know anything more about the report. And I look forward to talking to you all again in 2027.
Awesome. Well, Beth, thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Nicole and Chris, welcome to the Game Developer Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Brian.
Hi, I'm doing good.
Chris, you work here. How's it feel to be on a podcast for the first time in like eons?
Feels good. Feels like the start of a new era. 2026. I'm here to stay.
Nicole, you not only like are you podcasting for professionals today, but you've been writing for professionals before, where before most of your work was appearing in sort of more player-facing journalism sites. How's it feel to write for the business, us nerds?
I love it. I love to do it. I love that you can get so deep into all that like nitty-gritty business stuff.
I keep having to get used to when I'm talking to other journalists, like, oh, like, yeah, you guys talk about this, right? Or you care about this? Like, and I just get dead-eyed stares back and I'm like, right, no, we're the ones who care about like Jira like that our readers are worried about Jira tickets and stuff. Speaking of Jira tickets, or, oh man, unfortunately losing access to them, which is the darkest pivot I can make. We're here today talking about the GDC State of the Industry report. And there are a number of key statistics in here that, you know, we've been writing about in different forms. And we each of us have seen sort of like different sides of the story behind the numbers. So we're gonna just kick open the door with the most depressing number, which is 1 in 4 game developers and game industry professionals have been laid off in the last 2 years. Nicole, you have written about this through a number of different ways. You know, I think, you know, in the past, you've covered the news of layoffs and games shutting down. You've been doing some analysis for us. When you hear that number, that 1 in 4 game developers have been laid off, what is your reaction?
Yeah, it's not necessarily surprising to see that number given how closely we've been covering this for the past 2 years. But it's also just shocking to see in general, to really boil it down to 1 in 4. That is a 25%, 25% of people have been laid off. That is just stunning to see that sort of statistic out there, that it really is a huge percentage of the industry. And I know that, we wrote this story. We did the story about how layoffs were slowing in 2025. And while that is true, according to the numbers that we have, it's still a ton of people. And it's wild to think about the impact of that sort of thing on this industry.
Yeah, it's sort of like that Doctor Who meme, like a Peter Capaldi, like is 1 in 4 a lot? And it's like, it depends. Like cupcakes, no. People's jobs across an entire industry, yes. Chris, speaking of the Brits, 1 in 4. So you and I are like trading off, writing about, like frustrating layoff after horrible layoff. What was your reaction to seeing that number, and like, what did that make you think about?
Yeah, it's completely unsurprising, but like Nicole says, incredibly shocking. Just anecdotally, like I think the first article I wrote after returning from the holidays was a layoff story. I feel like I could say not a week goes by that I don't write about layoffs, but now it feels like not a day goes by that I don't write about layoffs. And it really is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Those are the layoffs that we know about. Those are the layoffs that we can confirm. I'm sure the real number is potentially higher. And we talk about like experienced layoffs, right? And obviously that can be interpreted in a number of ways. Is that, I, game developer, have been laid off, or is it I know someone who was laid off, my friend, my colleague, my coworker, and the impact of layoffs goes just beyond the people who lose their jobs, right? I think last year I talked to a lot of people who were the lucky ones, so to speak, the people who stayed behind after their colleagues were laid off, and they said, you can't account for that loss of talent, the loss of institutional knowledge. So yeah, it's gutting, in a sense of these studios that are left, they feel hollow, I think. And yeah, it's debilitating, right? It's going to have a massive impact just beyond the headlines that we've all penned over the past few years and that we will continue to write this year. When will it end? I have no idea. We all, I'm sure, are familiar with the phrase survive till 2025. Well, that year has been and gone. And again, looking from the outside in, it doesn't seem to be getting any better. That's all.
Yeah, now it's like get deep sixed in 2026. I rhymed six with six there, so that doesn't actually count. We're iterating. Looking, if I think back to 2 stories last year where we talk about layoffs and sort of like the whys and the whats. The first one that jumps to mind is the when I did some reporting on Probably Monsters and the alleged mismanagement at the studio there. One of the things I heard from folks there was whenever I sort of brought up, oh, right, there's been a couple rounds of layoffs, they would go, are you kidding? There's been like rounds and rounds of layoffs, and they're just sometimes companies are doing what they can to sort of shave incrementally, to whether it's trying to avoid triggering a WARN Act notice. Well, allegedly trying to avoid. I have to be a little specific here, trying to make sure we're on this circumstance. But there's lots of reasons, like a company may say, we need to reduce headcount by this much, and they may know that, like more cuts have to come, but they'll still only let that out a little bit of a time. And people intuitively get this one way or another, and so they're like, oh, cool, okay, I survived this round of layoff. What if I'm already on the chopping block and I just don't know yet, which is one of those disaster things people live through.
It's strange, isn't it? I feel like, at least on the side of it as a reporter, you sort of become numb to it, to the point where I was writing a layoff story, I think it was last week, about a mobile publisher called Playtika, and they had a 15% workforce reduction. And, I did what we always do, which is like, just, throw the name out there and see what other search results come up. Has this company laid off other staff in recent months and years? And I think it was 2 years prior, they had a 15% workforce reduction in January as well. And then there were more layoffs prior to that. And the messaging is always the same, right? We're doing this in the name of growth, really. Sustainable growth. That's a phrase that we always hear. And it's kind of shocking just to me personally as to how frequent these stories are, to the point where I'm now forgetting stories that I've written 2 years ago about layoffs at the same company, right? And it's easy to almost feel like it's normal, but this isn't normal. Like when I first started covering news way back when, I think maybe a layoff story would be like a huge story, just because they weren't that frequent. And obviously now it is big news, as we saw yesterday with Ubisoft, right? And the company reset, I think was the word they used, that will still bring about 200 million euros worth of cost cutting in the next 2 years.
or 300 million or something. I forget the exact number.
Yeah, an extraordinary number.
Yeah.
You know, and these stories are almost bread and butter news stories now, which is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, there's no other word for it really in my mind. So yeah, I think it's important to remember that, you know, as much as it feels like this is the norm, it isn't in any way normal. Especially if you're, you know, one of the people who's caught up in this.
Yeah. Nicole, are there any are there any companies you've written about or folks you've spoken with that like have really stuck with you in the last few years when you've written about like layoffs, closures, etc.? Like, is there anything that really like you just like you close your eyes and you're like, man, that anecdote or that story or that situation still sticks with you?
Well, I think if we're speaking generally, the one thing that I have heard from people who have been laid off, from analysts, from like, you know, managers, is that the confusing thing here for a lot of people is like layoffs cost money. You know, you aren't getting an immediate, a company is not going to sustainably grow immediately because it costs money. There's so many costs associated with laying off people, with laying off one person and then going, you know, exponentially. And I think it's like so confusing for me and for others to see that and to think like, okay, it costs so much money for this, for these layoffs to happen. Like, what is even, you know, it's hard to see like what the point is or like where you're going because, okay, so is the benefit from this like a year out, 6 months out for the company, like 2 years out? It just makes no sense in my mind to see these wide scale layoffs in the name of growth, knowing, you know, how much this costs for companies and how much, you know, it just baffles me.
Yeah. I'm going to quickly rattle off some statistics. That's what we're calling statistics now. I'm going to rattle off some numbers for you in the audience to consider as we move on from this topic, which is that game designers, which includes my peers in writing and narrative design, reported the highest percentage of layoffs within the last 12 months, while those working in business operations and services said they experienced the least. That was only 8%. Fascinating. Though my sympathies go out to anyone from those worlds who's also been laid off too. Everyone has been laid off, to be clear. But it's just fascinating, you know, who makes the games versus who gets laid off. Scooching by, as we just kind of looking at some numbers, the number one reason given for layoffs or that workers reported was company restructuring. 43% of respondents indicated that. Budget cuts and market conditions tied for number two at 38%. But the number one factor that workers blamed for that people said was company mismanagement. But we are going to move on from this discussion because, unfortunately, I think we will all become very depressed if we talk too much about it. So let's discuss something less depressing: generative AI. You know, the thing that some people say we can replace game workers with. This data is really interesting. We've seen a lot of data about generative AI in the past. Last year's State of the Industry report had some really interesting numbers about how devs are responding to it. And I've always sort of been like, if you ever see a survey that's like unanimously positive or unanimously negative, I sort of don't trust the results because like, this is not necessarily a strict like if you're on social media, it feels one way. And if you're in like San Francisco at a AI party, it feels another way. But you know, most people are experiencing this in such a wide range of space that when you have data showing that people are using it, but they're sort of frustrated by it, that kind of feels like that anecdote mirrors the anecdote that I feel. If we dig into the number here, so what we have is 36% of respondents to the State of the Industry survey said they do use generative AI tools. 64% said they don't. But what impact do people think it's having on the game industry? 52% of respondents said it is having a negative impact. Only 7% said it's having a positive impact. Chris, starting with you, when you talk to game developers, does this line up with your with what you hear, is there some difference between the numbers and reality, or is this like, no, yeah, that's about right?
Yeah, again, it feels consistent, right? I think we can tie it back to what you said about the reasons for layoffs. A lot of people feel it's mismanagement. One thing we know about Gen AI is that it is being pushed heavily by management. People in the C-suite, the people that have been taken to the stage, during investor conferences, EA or wherever, Embracer Group, and sort of waxing lyrical about the unheralded benefits of generative AI and how it's going to revolutionize video game development production, how it's going to introduce experiences that you couldn't possibly imagine. I think the EA investor presentation was a great example of that because, they said, you won't believe what we can do with this, and then showed a demo where someone was making a stage made out of cardboard boxes, which is not that crazy an idea in my opinion. But yeah, I think this is something that is being pushed heavily from the top down. Devs will then obviously have to use it. Whether they enjoy using it, I would suggest that many don't. We can talk about the utility of certain AI tools, and I think there is utility in some AI tools. But I think what developers are being told about AI is that it's going to be this, and again, generative AI specifically, is that it's going to be this magic wand, right? That will just cure all ills, and it will make every aspect of your job so efficient. It's going to be a revolution. And I don't think many believe that. And I would probably agree with them.
Nicole, just once again, any anecdotes from the field, any reports from conversations, any stories about seven-fingered monstrosities from the devs you speak with?
I've spoken to a lot of developers about AI, and the thing that strikes me is that, yes, this is being pushed so heavily by higher ups, but even through all of those conversations that I have, I don't feel like I have a good grasp on how AI is actually being used in game development. Every time I've spoken to people about AI, it's been explained to me, regardless of the company, as like these kind of useless like extra step tools for the things around the workplace. So like your performance review, determining your goals for the future, using AI to help you there, which is baffling to me that you would want that you wouldn't want to, that they don't want people to come up with that on their own. But it's like these tools that are surrounding the workplace and AI. And I haven't heard a ton about the actual practical uses of generative AI in game development, except for obviously, you see the reports about it doing code, vibe coding, that sort of thing. But I haven't personally, I've seen the reports out there, but I haven't personally talked to anyone at any company who is using generative AI to like generate code. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is the impact of generative AI on the industry and on works that are not using generative AI. Every time you see something that's like, maybe it looks kind of bad, or like it looks like a style that could have been, I don't know, maybe it's something that like looks like it got spit out of a generative AI thing. You see this being like thrown, oh, this is AI. Like, and I think that is causing a lot of confusion and damage to people who even aren't using generative AI. It's really, I think that there's so much, you hear the executives talking this big game about generative AI, but there's so much confusion around what it actually is, how it's actually being used, and just it's making problems for so much.
If I can share some numbers from the survey that in theory should shine a light. Survey respondents said that ChatGPT is the most used tool, with Google Gem at 74%, or 74% indicated that it's being used. Google Gemini clocked in at 37%, and Microsoft Copilot 22%, which is a little head scratching because those are all LLMs. And how do LLMs go into games? Again, that's the question you're asking. So let's turn to how do you use generative AI tools? And what we see here is the number one is an 81% indication of research and brainstorming, which is, again, like, what is that? How does that make a game? Like, in theory, like, I was researching and brainstorming games when I was writing down scribbles in my notebook in high school for like the ideal kind of like World of Warcraft game I wanted to make or something or whatever. Writing emails and scheduling and other daily tasks clocks in at 47%, and code assistance, which is that gray area, right, of like where you hear the most like sincere enthusiasm, going beyond vibe coding, right? Vibe coding is just like make this, versus code assistance sort of look first, like autocomplete and other things. That is also sitting there at 47%. The most damning number to me is that personalized content and procedural generation of game features. That is way down at only 10% and 12%. And if you're talking about like what automation in games like really enables, it's those two things in theory, right? Like something that can respond to the player dynamics the best. And those are so low, and that is that's not a good sign for me about like how effective this tool can be used in creative work, in the creative work of this field. We're going to jump topics here to talk about unions. This was a number that like stunned me. So the survey organizers, we talked to Beth Elderkin earlier in the episode, made some tweaks to the survey this year. So what we're looking at this year is that the interest in unions in the United States has jumped to the point that now 62% of game workers in the United States are not in a union, but they're interested in joining one. Meanwhile, about 12% are actually in a union. It's interesting, they zeroed into the United States because the United States, when we think about unionization, sort of the biggest dramatic, like join a union, like fight against company pressure to not do so. Unfortunately, the United States is sort of the home of that because other countries have actual regulation and unions are more normalized. Like Paradox Interactive was talking when I was reporting on that studio last year. Like I was learning about the union dynamics, which are interesting because it's like in the United States, like the union is this, sort of like sword that opens power that workers didn't have before, and in other countries they have actual regulations that like unions sort of don't need to fight for, so they're sort of focused on other tasks. But yeah, we have a jump here in the United States. Like essentially in the last few years, like it was sort of like reported that 50% of game workers everywhere wanted to join a union, but if we zero the focus to the United States, we're looking at the 62% number. You both write a lot about unions, so I'll open the floor. What momentum have you guys seen in the unionization push that is different than prior years?
Yeah, I mean, definitely again, like anecdotally, but there seems to be there's a lot more coverage on our end about unions being formed, specifically within major companies in the US. I think Microsoft is the obvious one to point out. They signed a labor neutrality agreement with the CWA. I think that was ahead of the merger with Activision Blizzard, and that has sort of paved the way for a lot of workers to form unions within the company unimpeded. So yeah, I think last year we saw like multiple wall-to-wall unions form within Microsoft, subsidiaries like Blizzard, ZeniMax. And again, it's all linked. I think you talk about job losses, that creates uncertainty. People are crying out for stability and security. And they see unions as a way to not guarantee that, but maybe it just steadied the ship a little bit. When I talk to union reps, they say, look, like we can't always prevent layoffs, but what we can do is maybe get you more severance if you are laid off. So again, it's that sense of people are looking for a life raft in very, very rocky waters, and I think that's what unions can offer. And the more headlines about unionization that exist, the more people become aware of unions. So I'm sure that helps spark those conversations into life as well.
Yes, I do think that layoffs have been a huge contributor to interest in unions and understanding what that could do for you. There's so much turmoil in the industry that, you know, people want, like Chris just said, like some stability. And as someone who was laid off and was laid off as part of a union, I know that firsthand, that the work that the union did to get us a guaranteed amount of severance and to get even, a guaranteed amount of time, like with our, and when that severance was delivered, like just it having some guidelines out there and that support was so important to me. Even just having, regardless of what is in our contract and having severance, it was so nice to have the support of a union behind me and knowing that, these people are no longer my coworkers. Like I don't work there anymore, but they care about me, they care about us, and they care about, holding the company accountable for this. And you can see that in the relationships that are built there. And so that's really special. And that's something that, you can have without a union, but it's hard to have on the scale that like a union provides you, because a lot of the people, so in the Vox Media Union, which was the union that I was a part of, I would have never spoken to, because I just didn't have the opportunity to. And, that camaraderie and that solidarity is so special, especially in a time where things are so terrible.
We obviously would prefer that times were not terrible.
And union's still good at that time too. It's still good in a time that's not terrible.
Just to jump in as well, Brian, one more thing about unions that I don't think it's talked about that often is just that, this conversation is always framed as like this conflict between employees and an employer. But when I speak to some union members and reps, there's a sense that what they're fighting for, which is security and stability, will ultimately benefit their employers, right? People who feel comfortable in a job, who don't feel like the rug's going to get pulled out from under them, and just like that, they do better work. And better work within game studios means better video games. So I think that's something that often isn't spoken about. Unionization doesn't always have to be this conflict. It's something that can be mutually beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. We could go on for quite some time about sort of two forking thoughts I have off that, which is one that like unionization is a little strange because it is a place where people's personal ideologies sort of enter the battle, right? Like where leaders with a lot of power, like how they personally view the world and view this business affects things. And the second one being like unions sort of help cement unions. If you're in a union, you are in a situation where you have more ability to not just sort of be treated as a cog in the machine, but you do have industry leaders who do sort of see workers as cogs in machines. Like, oh, we need to make ramp up for the next Call of Duty. Okay, doesn't matter what 100 programmers we get in here, as long as you have 100 programmers, and stabilizing so that you have consistency is sort of not viewed as a priority. Like I said, we could talk about that for a while, but I'm just going to slam my fist down and go, no, that's the last word on that. Because there is one more data point we want to hit before we get out the door. This one is an interesting number that the server organizers pulled, which is that 38% of business leaders responding to the survey reported that tariffs imposed by the United States government are impacting the game industry. And keep in mind, this comes in a business that in theory, games themselves are not being affected by tariffs, right? But we're still seeing this result. What do you two make of that? I don't even know if either of you have interviewed anyone about that, but it's there, it's a number. What are your thoughts?
I haven't done a ton of reporting on tariffs impacting specifically the video game industry. I've done a bunch of reporting on tabletop and tariffs, but I can see the ways that tariffs might be impacting the video game industry with, the sorts of equipment that you need to build video games, and, maybe like data center stuff. But like you said, I haven't done a ton of reporting there. I'd be curious to hear what Krista says. And before I say that, I'm sorry you guys have to see me with this. I'm now wearing pink cat ear
Beautiful
headphones.
pink cat headphones? Are you kidding? That's a bonus in this industry.
Okay, great.
For the audio listeners, Nicole did this amazing magic switch due to the always feared technical issues that can pop up when you're doing a podcast. Nicole just did this magic behind the scenes switch from ordinary headphones, ordinary black headphones to the most amazing pink headphones with cat ears. I think I'll only say I'm just glad we didn't have to explain this during the layoff part of the conversation.
Honestly, me too. I actually missed like the majority of the union conversation after I spoke because my computer was, every time I would put the volume back up, it would send it all the way back down. And then I would put it back up and it would send it all the way back down. So I think there's something wrong with the headphone. Anyway, sorry about that. Now I'm wearing pink.
We are all good. For everyone at home, you know what? Just like games podcasts, sometimes they ship a little buggy. We're gonna bless you all at home with just a little bit of that raw technical meat. Chris, tariffs.
Yes.
What are your thoughts here? I'm gonna desperately try to get this ship back on track.
Yeah, I mean, we saw at least last year, a couple of news stories where the biggest players in the industry, I think Nintendo said that they had to increase the price of hardware and certain products due to obviously the impact of tariffs. They were passing that on to the consumer, which, I think a lot of analysts suggested might happen, and lo and behold, it did. We also saw, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Microsoft raised the price of some hardware. Was it twice last year, or was it?
Yeah, there were two hardware increases last year.
Yeah. Which I don't think they said was directly the result of tariffs.
None of them do, because then Trump yells at them.
Yeah, but you read the room and connect the dots a little bit. And that was console hardware. That's what, like half a decade old at this point. So obviously that's a rarity, isn't it? And yeah, like Nicole said as well, obviously the kind of impact on small businesses depends obviously where they get equipment, the scale of their business, I assume. But yeah, I imagine obviously there'll be some impact there. But we definitely saw the bigger players coming out, and obviously in the case of Nintendo, just saying, hey, look, this is having an impact. And in the case of Microsoft, maybe just slightly gesturing towards the tariffs, if not outright pointing and yelling at them.
Yeah. Let's speaking of pointing at tariffs, we do have some anecdotes from people who respond to the survey that we sort of can give us some clues. We have a director of marketing PR in Sweden who left what I thought was a pretty insightful comment saying, quote, "We are an EU company working with US partners. I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's been a downright mess trying to set up pipelines and plan physical releases when President Trump's moods dictate how much products and components get taxed. Even if we ship and partly produce products for the US market in the EU, we can never know if we or our partners will get a higher import tax bill than estimated while simultaneously making their customers wait." Another insightful comment that actually shows how tariffs affects currency rates, which currency, if you've ever, especially say you're on Steam and you're trying to figure out what the price of your game could be, how your currency converts to other regions is a complex topic. This director of live ops and analytics from a Netherlands-based studio said, "It's become more expensive to do business in the Americas. The exchange rate has worsened for currency, and our North American players are having less to spend." And meanwhile, a California-based consultant for business and strategy says, quote, "Our overall profit is down about 30% across the board versus even revenue, and our ability to travel and participate in events has been cut in half." Nicole, you and I are based in the US, so mostly oh boy, does this make me feel sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Regarding, the physical releases, I have done some reporting on the tabletop industry, and that comment reminded me of that. One person told me that in shipping their goods for a physical release for a board game from the manufacturer or their warehouse overseas to the United States, that the situation would be changing while the stuff is on the ship, like while this is traveling across the ocean, and that sending that stuff is a gamble because you don't know what it's going to be when you hit US shores, like what the situation is going to be like. So it was really, really confusing for a lot of people. I feel like I've said confusing so much this podcast, but like I think these times are very confusing. It's confusing, horrible nightmare for people.
Yeah. I think I have an anecdote, which is I found out from my local game store. I can't buy cardboard boxes from them anymore, at least the big ones that I need to store lots of cards, because they're not carrying them anymore because tariffs have raised the price of cardboard boxes to more than anyone will pay. If I really want to get ones of that size, apparently I have to go on Amazon or something. So great, cool, love it.
So ugh.
The look of, for the audio listeners, Nicole said she's been confused so much on this podcast. That confusion is now spread to her face as I relate my tale of cardboard boxes.
I'm so sorry. I have a lot of cardboard boxes if you want to come pick them up.
Oh my god. I think one closing thought on this, because we're talking about physical releases in video games, and people might go, well, video games are very digital now, right? Like if you're still some of the big players, like you want to have physical copies of games on like store shelves in Target or Walmart or the ever decreasing number of GameStop stores. But for most of us out here in the world, we're selling online. How does that impact us? And I did hear at one point from a publisher that one of the advantages of producing a physical retail game is to effectively create an SKU that then is listed on stores that also have online shipping sites, like your Target, Walmart, GameStop, etc. So it's a marketing tool for your game, not just in a like, hey, we're appealing to our core fans, but also a, hey, like if you're kind of looking for games online, now there's more places where you can find it. So it's definitely adding to the confusion is the fact that it can seem like it shouldn't matter, but it does. And unfortunately, this is just one of those cases where I have to tell people, like, hey guys, like the problem with politics is even if you think it doesn't affect you, it does. So them's the works. Chris, any last thoughts from you on the subject as the person not locked on in this country, as the person who doesn't have to pay these tariff charges? Any thoughts from you before we wrap things up today?
just thank God I don't have to pay those tariff charges. Thank God I can get my cardboard boxes. I'll ship some to you, Brian.
Using the gift, like getting them gifted from the UK.
I'll bring some over when I fly to GDC. We'll circumvent it. Yeah.
Oh my god. Okay, yeah. Well, Nicole, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the Game Developer Podcast today. And I hope for folks at home, if you want to read more insights from both of them, you can find them both on Game Developer, filing great stories. Nicole, because you're not always with us, where else can folks find the great things you're writing?
Oh gosh, what is my username on Blue Sky? It's Nicole Carpenter, I believe. Just Nicole Carpenter at whatever you put at bluesky.social.
Yeah,
but otherwise, I have a website, Nicole Carpenter Writes. That's also my Gmail account. I'm pretty easy to find.
Very good. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you guys both. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thanks again to Beth, Chris, and Nicole for coming by the show. You can find all their social handles and a link to the State of the Industry report in the show notes. For more from us at Game Developer, be sure to visit www.gamedeveloper.com, follow us on major social platforms, and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find me on Blue Sky at bryantfrancis.me. Today's episode was edited by Pierre Landreau, and our theme music is by Mike Meehan. Thanks for listening, and wait, I've been here a decade? 10 years? That can't be right. I just started a few years ago. I need to go talk to someone about that. Ugh.